Charlotte Winters stared at the imposing Apache widower's weathered hands as he offered her a silver turquoise ring and the most desperate bargain she'd ever faced: become mother to his 3 half-wild children in exchange for shelter, or return to Boston with nothing but her shattered dignity. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Montana Territory, autumn 1885. The wind whispered secrets through the tall grass as Samuel Runninghawk surveyed the land that stretched before him. His land, 300 acres of Montana Territory that no one believed an Apache man could claim, much less transform into one of the most prosperous ranches in the valley. The setting sun painted the distant mountains in hues of purple and gold, casting long shadows across the fields where his horses grazed. It was beautiful, but Samuel had long since learned that beauty often masked the harshest truths. He turned to face the sturdy log house he'd built with his own hands. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of rabbit stew, Hannah's attempt at dinner. At 13, his eldest tried her best, but cooking wasn't her gift. The thought brought a familiar ache to his chest. 2 years had passed since Marie's death, yet the wound felt fresh each time he returned to a home without her. Pa! Pa! 7-year-old Jacob came running across the yard, his small boots kicking up dust. Thomas put a frog in Hannah's water bucket, and she's threatening to skin him alive. Samuel suppressed a sigh. Where's Mrs. Caldwell? The elderly neighbor woman who helped with the children was supposed to be watching them today while he mended fences on the north pasture. Gone home, said her joints was aching something fierce. Jacob tugged at his father's hand. You better come quick. Hannah's got the wooden spoon. Inside the cabin, chaos reigned. 5-year-old Thomas cowered behind a chair, while Hannah brandished the dreaded spoon, her dark braids coming loose from their ties, her face flushed with anger. The offending frog had escaped and was making wet tracks across the plank floor. Enough! Samuel's voice cut through the noise, and all 3 children froze. Hannah, put that spoon down. Thomas, catch that frog and return it to where it belongs. He removed his hat and hung it on the peg by the door, trying to ignore the clutter and disarray that had become the norm since Marie's passing. Hannah's eyes, so like her mother's, flashed with frustration. I was trying to make dinner, and he just... I know. Samuel softened his tone. You're doing your best. Later, after a meal that was both burned and undercooked in places, Samuel sat on the porch while the children slept. The vast Montana sky stretched above him, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Marie had loved the night sky. So much bigger than in Louisiana, she'd whisper, nestled against his shoulder. Tomorrow, he would ride into town for supplies. Perhaps Mrs. Caldwell's daughter could spare a few hours to watch the children. But these temporary solutions were failing. Hannah was missing too much school, trying to be the woman of the house. The boys were growing wild, and Samuel was exhausted, trying to maintain the ranch while raising 3 children alone. News had reached him of the new school teacher who'd arrived from Boston last month, a woman named Charlotte Winters. Folks in town spoke of her kindness, her patience with even the most difficult children. Samuel had glimpsed her once, a slender figure in a blue dress, her honey-colored hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. She'd been surrounded by children, their faces upturned like flowers seeking the sun. But now she was without position or home. The schoolhouse, built on disputed land, had been burned to the ground last week, another casualty in the territory's endless conflicts. Samuel had heard she was staying temporarily with the minister's family, but they barely had room for themselves. A plan began to form in Samuel's mind as he watched the moon rise over the eastern ridge. It was not a romantic notion. Samuel had buried such thoughts alongside his beloved wife. This was about practicality, about survival. His children needed a mother. His home needed a woman's touch, and from what he'd heard, Miss Charlotte Winters needed shelter and protection in a territory that could be cruel to women alone. Tomorrow, after his errands, he would speak with her. He would make his proposition clear, a marriage of convenience. She would have a home, security, and children who desperately needed her. In return, she would bring order back to his household, educate his children, restore some semblance of normalcy. Samuel Runninghawk was not a man given to uncertainty, but as he finally rose to go inside, he felt a flicker of doubt. Would a cultured Boston woman even consider such an arrangement with a man like him? Charlotte Winters stood at the window of Reverend Miller's modest parlor, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. The letter from her mother lay open on the side table, its contents a thinly veiled demand disguised as maternal concern. "Your position is gone, Charlotte. There is nothing keeping you in that wild country. Come home where you belong." Home. The word caught in her throat. Boston had never truly felt like home, with its stifling propriety and endless expectations. She had come to Montana seeking purpose, hoping to make a difference in children's lives. Now, with the schoolhouse reduced to charred timber and ash, that purpose had been cruelly snatched away. "More tea, Miss Winters?" Mrs. Miller appeared in the doorway, her kind face lined with fatigue. The minister's wife had welcomed Charlotte with open arms, but the small house was already crowded with their 4 children. "No, thank you." Charlotte smiled, folding her mother's letter. "You've been so generous, Mrs. Miller. I cannot impose much longer." "Nonsense. You'll stay until arrangements can be made." Mrs. Miller lowered her voice. "Though I must tell you, my husband received a letter from the school board today. They've decided not to rebuild until spring. The winter comes early here, and with the land dispute still unresolved." Charlotte's heart sank. "I see. Without a position, without a home, what reason did she have to stay?" Yet the thought of returning to Boston, defeated, made her chest tighten with dread. "Perhaps I could find work elsewhere, the mercantile or—" Mrs. Miller's expression turned sympathetic. "Mr. Hopkins already hired the blacksmith's daughter to mind the store, and Mrs. Thornton has her niece helping at the boarding house." She hesitated. "There's always the saloon. They're looking for—" "No." Charlotte's response was immediate. She had not come all this way, defied her family's wishes to end up serving drinks to rowdy men in a frontier saloon. "I understand." Mrs. Miller touched her arm gently. "We'll think of something. Meanwhile, the children would love if you'd read to them before supper." Later, as Charlotte sat surrounded by the Miller children, their faces bright with wonder as she read from Treasure Island, she felt a moment's peace. This was what she had been meant to do: nurture young minds, kindle imagination, offer guidance. The loss of the schoolhouse hadn't changed that calling. "Miss Winters?" Little Emma Miller looked up with solemn eyes. "Is it true you have to go away?" Charlotte's throat tightened. "I'm not sure yet, Emma." "I don't want you to go," the child declared, her lower lip trembling. "You're the best teacher ever. You don't yell like old Mr. Peterson did." "Hush, Emma," her older brother scolded. "Miss Winters is a lady. Ladies don't belong out here anyway, that's what Pa said." The words stung, though Charlotte knew they weren't meant to hurt. It was simply the reality many in the territory believed, that women like her, educated and unmarried, were out of place on the frontier, that she should return to civilization, to the safety of her family's Boston home, and leave the building of this wild country to men. After the children were tucked into bed, Charlotte slipped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of pine. The main street of Whitewater Creek was quiet at this hour, most windows darkened except for the saloon, where lantern light spilled onto the muddy street, along with bursts of laughter and piano music. At 26, Charlotte was considered firmly on the shelf in Boston society. Her mother had long since given up hopes of a prestigious match, reconciling herself to Charlotte's eccentric desire to teach. But out here, unmarried women were rare and valuable. She'd received 3 proposals since arriving, all from men who wanted a mother for their children or simply a woman to cook and clean. She had declined them all, holding fast to her independence. But now, with winter approaching and no position, that independence felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the man until he spoke. "Evening, Miss Winters." Charlotte started, turning to find Sheriff Taylor standing nearby, his badge catching the moonlight. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said, tipping his hat. "It's not safe for a lady to wander alone after dark." "I needed some air," Charlotte explained, "and some clarity." The sheriff nodded, understanding in his weathered face. "Heard about the school board's decision. It's a shame. Those children took to you something fierce." He hesitated. "I also heard Samuel Running Hawk was asking after you today." Charlotte blinked in surprise. "The rancher? I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "No, I suppose not. He keeps to himself mostly, since his wife passed. But he was in town this morning, and your name came up." Sheriff Taylor shifted uncomfortably. "He's a good man, Miss Winters. Different from most, being Apache and all. But he's earned respect around here, built that ranch from nothing." "Why would he be asking about me?" Charlotte felt a flutter of curiosity. The sheriff shrugged. "Can't say for certain. But a widower with 3 young ones might have particular reasons to inquire after a schoolteacher." He cleared his throat. "Just thought you should know. Good night, Miss Winters." As Charlotte watched him walk away, she wondered at the strange flicker of hope that had kindled in her chest. She knew of Samuel Running Hawk by reputation, a fierce, proud man who had defied prejudice and hardship to create a legacy for his children, a man who, like her, stood apart from the community around him. Perhaps tomorrow would bring the clarity she sought. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost clinging to the grass and trees, standing like silent sentinels against the pale blue sky. Samuel rode into town early, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Hannah had protested being left behind with her brothers, but he'd been firm. This errand required privacy. He completed his business at the mercantile quickly: flour, coffee, sugar, and a small bag of peppermint sticks that would make the children smile. Mr. Hopkins watched him warily, as always. Even after 15 years in the territory, Samuel was still the Indian to some folks. He paid for his goods without comment, leaving them to be collected later. The minister's house sat at the edge of town, a modest white structure with a small garden now withered by frost. Samuel hesitated before dismounting, suddenly questioning the wisdom of his plan. He was a practical man, not given to foolish impulses. Yet here he was, about to propose marriage to a woman he'd barely met. Before he could reconsider, the front door opened and Charlotte Winters emerged. She wore a simple dress of deep green, her honey-colored hair captured in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She carried a book and seemed intent on finding a quiet spot to read. Samuel cleared his throat. "Miss Winters?" She turned, startled, her blue eyes widening as they took in the tall figure of Samuel Running Hawk. He knew what she saw, a man whose Apache heritage was evident in his high cheekbones and obsidian eyes, whose years working the land had weathered his skin and hardened his frame. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was strength in his face, dignity in his bearing. "Mr. Running Hawk," she replied, recovering quickly. "Good morning." He was impressed by her composure. Most Eastern women would have retreated at the sight of him. "I hoped we might speak privately," he said, his voice low and measured. "I have a matter of some importance to discuss." Curiosity flickered across her face. "Of course. Perhaps we could walk. The Millers are kind, but the walls are thin." They fell into step together, following the path that led toward the creek. Samuel searched for the right words, finding none that didn't sound abrupt or presumptuous. "Sheriff Taylor mentioned you were asking after me," Charlotte said, breaking the silence. "May I inquire as to why?" Direct, another surprise. Samuel appreciated that quality. "I've heard good things about you, Miss Winters, about your way with children. I'm a teacher," she said simply. "Or I was, until the schoolhouse burned." "I know of your situation." Samuel stopped walking, turning to face her. "Just as you may know of mine, I am a widower with 3 children who need more than I alone can give them." Charlotte's expression shifted subtly. "Mr. Running Hawk, please, hear me out." He gestured toward a fallen log nearby. "May we sit?" When they were settled, Samuel continued, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "My wife, Marie, died bringing Thomas into this world. For 2 years, I've tried to be both father and mother to my children. I've failed them in many ways." The admission cost him, but honesty was all he had to offer. "Hannah is 13, and shouldering burdens no child should bear. Jacob is wild as a young colt, and Thomas has never known a mother's love." He turned to her then, meeting her steady gaze. "I'm not a romantic man, Miss Winters. I loved my wife deeply, but she is gone. What I propose is a practical arrangement. Marriage, yes, but one of mutual benefit." Charlotte's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained level. "You're very direct, sir." "I respect you too much to be otherwise," he replied. "You need shelter, security, purpose. I can provide all 3. My ranch is prosperous. You would want for nothing material. In return, you would bring order to my household, education to my children, and the feminine influence they desperately need." "And what of other marital obligations?" she asked quietly, her gaze unwavering. Samuel appreciated her courage in asking the question directly. "I would be your husband in name, with all the respect and protection that entails. Anything more would be at your discretion, in your time." He paused, then added, "I am not offering romance, Miss Winters, but I believe we could build a partnership of mutual respect and purpose." Charlotte was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the spine of her book. "This is unexpected." "I understand," Samuel said, rising. "I don't expect an immediate answer. Take what time you need to consider. I'll be collecting my supplies shortly, if you wish to speak further." As he walked away, leaving Charlotte seated on the log, Samuel felt the weight of vulnerability on his shoulders. It had been many years since he'd laid his needs bare before another person. Charlotte remained on the log long after Samuel's retreating figure disappeared around the bend. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her book, staring blindly at words that no longer registered. A marriage proposal, so unexpected, so pragmatic, so utterly different from anything she might have imagined. In Boston, proposals came with flowers and poetry, with parental approval and considerations of family connections. They followed a careful dance of courtship, chaperoned walks, and veiled intentions. They were not delivered plainly beside a frost-covered creek by a man whose eyes held no pretense, only clear purpose. She closed the book and stood, needing movement to order her chaotic thoughts. What did she truly know of Samuel Running Hawk? He was Apache, had married a woman named Marie, had built his ranch from nothing. He had 3 children, Hannah, Jacob, and Thomas. Beyond these basic facts, he remained a mystery. But wasn't she equally unknown to him? He knew only her reputation as a teacher, her current circumstances. He didn't know about her childhood in Boston's wealthy Beacon Hill neighborhood, her father's disappointment when she chose education over an advantageous marriage, or her mother's endless reminders that she was throwing away her prospects. Charlotte made her way toward town, her steps slow and deliberate. The Mercantile stood at the center of Whitewater Creek's main street, its windows displaying tools, fabrics, and sundry goods. She paused across the street, watching as Samuel emerged from the store. He moved with the confident grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, tall and straight-backed, despite the heavy bags he carried. Mr. Hopkins, the mercantile owner, followed him onto the porch. "Running Hawk," he called, his voice carrying in the morning air. "Found these in the back. Thought your girl might like 'em." He held out what appeared to be hair ribbons. Samuel turned, regarding the offering for a moment before accepting them with a nod. "Thank you, Hopkins. Hannah will be pleased." The simple exchange revealed something Charlotte hadn't expected: respect. Hopkins was known for his prickly nature and prejudices, yet he'd thought of Samuel's daughter, saved ribbons for her. It spoke volumes about how the community truly viewed this man, beyond whispers and sidelong glances. As Samuel loaded his supplies onto his horse, a group of men emerged from the saloon, their loud voices carrying across the street. One pointed in Samuel's direction, saying something that made the others laugh. Samuel didn't react, continuing his work with steady hands. "Hey, Injun," one of the men called out. "Heard your crop did better than most this season. What's your secret? Some kind of savage magic?" Charlotte's breath caught, anger flaring in her chest at the deliberate provocation. She watched Samuel straighten to his full height, turning slowly to face the men. He said nothing, but something in his stance made the laughter fade. "Just making conversation," the man muttered, suddenly finding his boots interesting. Samuel finished securing his supplies and mounted his horse with fluid grace. As he turned to leave, his gaze swept the street and locked with Charlotte's. For a moment, they simply looked at one another across the distance. He on horseback, she standing in the shadow of a storefront. Then he nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps farewell, before riding away. Charlotte found herself walking toward the church, seeking the quiet sanctuary to order her thoughts. Inside, the simple wooden pews and altar offered solace. She sat, removing her gloves and pressing her palms together in contemplation. What choice did she truly have? Return to Boston in defeat, to face her father's satisfied "I told you so," and her mother's renewed efforts to find her a suitable husband. Seek employment elsewhere in the territory, knowing positions for educated women was scarce, or accept this practical arrangement with a man who had been nothing but honest in his intentions. Troubled thoughts, Miss Winters? Charlotte looked up to find Reverend Miller approaching down the center aisle, his Bible tucked under one arm. "I've received a rather unexpected proposal," she admitted, seeing no reason to dissemble. News traveled quickly in small communities. By tomorrow, everyone would know of Samuel Running Hawk's visit. The minister sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. "From Mr. Running Hawk, I presume?" Charlotte nodded. "You don't seem surprised." When a man like Samuel sets his mind to something, it's generally with careful consideration. Reverend Miller opened his Bible, then closed it again without reading. He's not a man given to impulsive decisions. "You know him well." "As well as anyone, I suppose. He keeps to himself mostly, but he brings the children to service each Sunday, rain or shine. Contributes to the poor box generously, though he never draws attention to it." The minister smiled faintly. His wife, Marie, was Catholic, but she attended here as there was no Catholic church within 50 miles. After she passed, he continued coming, though I'm not certain what faith, if any, he privately holds. Charlotte absorbed this information, adding it to her mental portrait of the man. What sort of husband was he to her? Reverend Miller considered the question carefully. Devoted. Their marriage raised eyebrows initially. She was Creole from Louisiana, educated at a convent school. Quite a beauty by all accounts. They met when he was driving cattle south. His voice softened with memory. I've never seen a man more broken than Samuel was at her funeral. Yet he remained strong for those children, never faltered in caring for them. He seems formidable. He is that, the minister agreed. But there is kindness in him too, and integrity. Whatever he has proposed to you, Miss Winters, I believe he will honor his word." He paused, studying her face. "May I ask what you're considering?" Charlotte took a deep breath. "He has offered marriage, a practical arrangement. Security and purpose for me, motherly care and education for his children." "I see." Reverend Miller nodded slowly. "And your heart?" "My heart has little to do with it," Charlotte replied, echoing the pragmatism Samuel himself had expressed. "This is about survival, about making the best choice among limited options." "Perhaps. But in my experience, the heart has a way of inserting itself into even the most practical of arrangements." The minister rose, patting her shoulder gently. "Pray on it, Miss Winters, and remember that courage takes many forms. Sometimes it's in facing the unknown rather than retreating to the familiar." As he walked away, Charlotte remained in the quiet church, his words echoing in her mind. Courage. She had thought herself brave when she left Boston, defying her family to pursue her calling. Was she brave enough now to consider a life so different from anything she had imagined? Samuel would return to town tomorrow, expecting her answer. And somehow, Charlotte knew that whatever she decided would irreversibly alter the course of her life. Dawn broke with a sky streaked in amber and rose, the mountains to the west still shrouded in shadow as Charlotte dressed with deliberate care. She chose her best dress, navy blue with a lace collar, severe yet dignified. Her hair she swept into a simple chignon, her movements measured despite the trembling of her fingers. She had slept little, her mind spinning through possibilities, weighing choices, examining consequences. Mrs. Miller had watched her with knowing eyes at breakfast but asked no questions, simply pressing a warm biscuit into her hand with a motherly squeeze of her fingers. By mid-morning, Charlotte stood at the edge of town, a small valise at her feet containing the few possessions she'd brought to Montana Territory. She'd written to her parents, a brief letter explaining her decision without inviting their approval or blessing. It would shock them, she knew, perhaps even sever the already strained bonds between them. But as the stage arrived that would have carried her back to Boston, Charlotte did not board it. Instead, she waited, eyes fixed on the northern road. Samuel appeared exactly when he said he would, riding tall in the saddle with a pack horse trailing behind. He spotted her immediately, his expression revealing nothing as he approached and dismounted. "Miss Winters." He nodded, his obsidian eyes taking in her valise, her carefully arranged appearance. "Mr. Running Hawk." Charlotte met his gaze directly, her decision made. "I've considered your proposal." A muscle worked in his jaw. "And?" "I accept, with conditions." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Name them." Charlotte took a deep breath. "First, I will have authority over the children's education. I was trained for this purpose, and I won't have my methods questioned." "Agreed." "Second, while I understand this is a marriage of convenience, I expect to be treated as your equal partner in household matters. I won't be a servant or a subordinate." Samuel's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You'll find I've never sought to dominate anyone, Miss Winters. My late wife and I shared responsibilities according to our strengths." "Good." Charlotte squared her shoulders. "Third, if either of us finds this arrangement untenable, we will discuss it honestly and find a civil resolution." "You have my word." He studied her for a moment. "Is there more?" Charlotte hesitated. "One last thing. I would like a proper ceremony with witnesses, not for romance's sake, but because legal protection matters for women in this territory." Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Reverend Miller can perform the ceremony this afternoon. I've already spoken with him, should you accept." He gestured to the pack horse. I brought proper attire for the occasion. Charlotte blinked in surprise, both at his foresight and his consideration. You were that certain of my answer? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Not certain, hopeful. He reached into a saddlebag and withdrew a small wooden box. This belonged to my mother. I would like you to have it. Charlotte accepted the box, opening it carefully to reveal a simple silver band inlaid with turquoise stones. It's beautiful, she murmured, genuinely touched by the gesture. It's practical, Samuel countered, though something in his voice suggested otherwise. People will expect you to wear a ring. He glanced at the son. We should proceed. The children are with Mrs. Caldwell, but I don't like to leave them for long. The ceremony itself was brief, held in the small church with Reverend Miller officiating. Mrs. Miller and Sheriff Taylor stood as witnesses, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and cautious approval. Charlotte wore a modest, cream-colored dress that Samuel had brought, purchased, she suspected, during his previous visit to town. It fit surprisingly well, its simple elegance suited to the occasion. Samuel stood tall beside her, his black coat and string tie marking the solemnity of the event. When he spoke his vows, his voice was clear and steady, his hand warm around hers. Charlotte repeated her promises with equal conviction, aware that though their reasons were practical, the commitment was profound. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Miller declared, closing his Bible with a solemn nod. May God bless this union. Samuel's kiss was brief and formal, a light pressure against her lips that lasted only a moment, yet Charlotte felt a strange flutter in her chest, a sensation she promptly attributed to nerves. There was no celebration afterward, no gathering of well-wishers or shower of rice. The Millers offered congratulations and a small basket of provisions for the journey. Sheriff Taylor shook Samuel's hand with surprising warmth, then tipped his hat to Charlotte. Mrs. Running Hawk, he said, the new name sounding foreign to her ears. May you find happiness in your new home. Within the hour, they were on the road north towards Samuel's ranch. He had brought a sturdy mare for Charlotte to ride, the side saddle well-worn but of good quality. They traveled in companionable silence, the rhythm of hoofbeats and the vast Montana landscape making conversation seem unnecessary. As they crested a hill in late afternoon, Samuel reined his horse to a stop. There, he said, pointing to the valley below, Running Hawk Ranch. Charlotte caught her breath. From this vantage point, she could see the full expanse of his property, rich grazing land, stretching toward distant mountains, a creek winding through like a silver ribbon, fields cleared for crops, and a substantial herd of cattle dotting the landscape. At the center stood a large log house with a wraparound porch, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby were several outbuildings, a corral with horses, and what appeared to be a small orchard. It's magnificent, she said truthfully. Something like pride flickered across Samuel's face. I started with nothing but the land grant, built every structure myself, fence by fence, year by year. He looked at her, his expression serious. Now it's your home too. As they descended toward the ranch, Charlotte saw 3 small figures burst from the house and race toward the approaching riders, Hannah, Jacob, and Thomas, the children who now looked to her as mother. Her stomach tightened with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Samuel seemed to sense her tension. They're good children, he said quietly. They just need guidance and love. Charlotte nodded, straightening in the saddle. Whatever came next, she had made her choice. She would face it with the same courage that had brought her to Montana territory in the first place. The children reached them before the horses had fully stopped, their faces upturned with expressions ranging from curiosity to undisguised suspicion. Samuel dismounted first, lifting Thomas into his arms before helping Charlotte from her saddle. Children, he said, his voice gentle but firm. This is Miss Charlotte. She has agreed to be my wife and your new mother." Hannah, tall for 13 with her father's obsidian eyes and high cheekbones, regarded Charlotte with open skepticism. Her dark hair hung in 2 braids, one tied with the ribbon Samuel had brought from town. "We don't need a new mother," she declared, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Jacob, a wiry 7-year-old with a shock of black hair that looked as if it hadn't seen a brush in days, peered at Charlotte from behind his sister. "Is she gonna make us do lessons every day?" he asked, his tone suggesting this would be a grave injustice. Only Thomas, at 5, the spitting image of his father but with softer features that must have come from Marie, showed genuine interest. "Can you make apple cake?" he asked hopefully. "Mrs. Caldwell says only mamas know how." Charlotte felt Samuel tense beside her, but she laid a gentle hand on his arm, a silent request to let her respond. She knelt to Thomas's level, mindful of her skirt against the dusty ground. "I don't know about apple cake," she admitted with a smile, "but I'm a quick learner. Perhaps you could help me try." Thomas considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I could show you where the apples are." Charlotte stood, turning to Jacob next. "As for lessons, yes, there will be learning every day, but not all lessons happen at a desk. Some of the best ones occur outdoors, with birds and trees as teachers." Jacob's expression turned speculative, his hostility softening slightly. Finally, Charlotte faced Hannah, recognizing in the girl's defensive posture the weight of responsibility she'd carried. "I don't expect to replace your mother, Hannah," she said quietly. "No one could. But I hope in time you'll allow me to help shoulder some of your burdens." Hannah's jaw tightened, but she offered no response beyond a slight nod. Samuel cleared his throat. "Hannah, show Mrs. Running Hawk to her room and help her settle in. Jacob, Thomas, the horses need tending." As Samuel led the animals toward the barn, Charlotte followed Hannah into the house. The interior was spacious but Spartan. Functional furniture, bare plank floors, walls adorned only with a few practical items. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by shelves containing books and a few family mementos. "Pa built the house for our mother," Hannah said, leading Charlotte up a narrow staircase. "She helped design it, said it needed to be big enough for lots of children." Her voice caught slightly on the last word. Charlotte nodded, understanding the unspoken grief. Marie had died bringing Thomas into the world. There would be no more children from her. The bedroom Hannah showed her to was clearly the master chamber, a large space with a sturdy 4-poster bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand with a porcelain basin. A handmade quilt in rich earth tones covered the bed, and lace curtains adorned the windows. "These were my mother's," Hannah said, touching the curtains lightly. "Pa couldn't bear to take them down." "They're lovely," Charlotte replied. She set her valise on a chair, unsure what else to say. This room had belonged to another woman, a beloved wife and mother. Now it would be hers, or at least partly hers. The sleeping arrangements hadn't been explicitly discussed. Hannah watched her, dark eyes assessing. "Why did you agree to marry my father?" she asked bluntly. "Was it for the ranch? Because plenty of women would have said yes for that reason alone." Charlotte met the girl's gaze directly. "The ranch is impressive, but no. I agreed because I needed a purpose, and your father offered one I believe in, helping raise children who deserve the best chance at happiness and education." Hannah's expression remained skeptical. "You'll get tired of us, of this place. City women always do." "I may not have been born to ranch life, but I'm stronger than I look," Charlotte replied, "and I don't give my word lightly." Before Hannah could respond, Samuel appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. "Everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, his gaze taking in the two of them with an unreadable expression. "Yes, thank you," Charlotte said. She noticed smudges of dirt on his hands and forearms. He'd been working, not merely supervising the boys with the horses. Hannah slipped past her father without comment, her footsteps quick on the wooden stairs. "She needs time," Samuel said quietly once she'd gone. Charlotte nodded. "They all do. So do we." Samuel's eyes softened slightly. "Supper in an hour. The kitchen is..." He hesitated. It could use a woman's touch. "I'll see what can be done," Charlotte promised, already cataloguing the tasks ahead. Establish order, create routine, earn trust, one step at a time. After Samuel left, Charlotte stood alone in the bedroom, feeling the weight of her decision fully for the first time. She was Mrs. Runninghawk now, mistress of this ranch, stepmother to 3 wounded children, wife in name to a man she barely knew. What had seemed a practical solution in town now loomed as a mountain to be climbed. But as she unpacked her meager belongings, Charlotte reminded herself that she had never shied away from challenges. This would be her greatest yet, but also, perhaps, her most rewarding. The kitchen proved as austere as the rest of the house, functional but lacking warmth. Charlotte rolled up her sleeves, surveying the cast-iron stove, the rough-hewn table, the shelves of basic provisions. Evidence of Hannah's efforts at maintaining order were visible in the swept floor and neatly stacked dishes, but also in the scorch marks on pots and the mismatched arrangement of cooking implements. Investigating the pantry, Charlotte discovered a decent stock of essentials: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, preserved fruits, and smoked meats. A trap door in the floor led to a root cellar where vegetables and more preserves were stored. Whoever had stocked these supplies, likely Samuel himself, had done so with careful consideration for the approaching winter. She set about preparing a simple meal, conscious of 3 pairs of eyes watching her from various vantage points around the kitchen. Thomas had climbed onto a stool, openly curious about her movements. Jacob lounged in the doorway, affecting disinterest while missing nothing. Hannah sat at the table, ostensibly mending a shirt, but glancing up frequently to monitor Charlotte's use of her kitchen. "Would anyone like to help?" Charlotte asked, keeping her tone light. Thomas immediately raised his hand. "I can stir." Charlotte smiled, setting him up with a bowl of cornmeal batter. "Gently now, like this." Jacob edged closer. "I could get more wood for the stove," he offered, clearly wanting to be useful but reluctant to admit it. "That would be very helpful, thank you." Hannah remained at the table, her expression guarded. Charlotte approached her carefully, mindful of the girl's pride. "Hannah, I wonder if you might show me where the dishes are kept. I'd like to set the table properly for our first family meal." The word family hung in the air between them, a concept simultaneously familiar and foreign in this new configuration. After a moment's hesitation, Hannah set down her mending. "The good plates are in that cupboard," she said, pointing. "We only use them on Sundays and special days." "I think today qualifies as special, don't you?" Charlotte replied gently. Something shifted in Hannah's eyes, not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps a willingness to consider it. She nodded, rising to help with the place settings. By the time Samuel entered the kitchen, cleaned up from his chores, a transformation had occurred. The table was set with the good dishes, cornbread steamed in a cloth-lined basket, and a hearty stew simmered on the stove. More remarkably, all 3 children were engaged in preparations. Thomas carefully folding napkins, Jacob filling water glasses, and Hannah arranging utensils with precise attention to their placement. Samuel paused in the doorway, his expression revealing brief surprise before settling into something warmer. "This is nice," he said, the simple words carrying weight. Charlotte felt a flutter of satisfaction. "Dinner is nearly ready. Please, sit." The meal began awkwardly, with more clinking of spoons against bowls than conversation. Charlotte observed as Samuel bowed his head briefly before eating, not an elaborate prayer, but an acknowledgement of gratitude. The children followed his example without prompting. "The stew is good," Samuel said after several silent minutes, his deep voice startling in the quiet kitchen. "Thank you. I found some dried herbs that added flavor." Charlotte turned to Thomas. "And thank you for your excellent stirring of the cornbread." Thomas beamed. "I'm a good stirrer. Pa says so." "Indeed you are," Samuel agreed, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Jacob, how did the mare's hoof look? Better?" "Yes, sir. I packed it with that mixture you showed me. She's not favoring it anymore." Charlotte listened as father and son discussed horse care, noting the easy way Samuel included his children in ranch business, even the youngest. He spoke to them as people whose opinions mattered, not as charges to be directed. It spoke well of him as a father. "Hannah," Samuel said, turning to his daughter, "Mrs. Caldwell mentioned you've been helping her with reading. That was kind of you." Hannah shrugged, though Charlotte detected a hint of pride in the girl's posture. "She wants to write to her sister in Ohio, but her eyes aren't good for small print anymore." "That's a valuable service," Charlotte said. "Literacy connects people across great distances. It's one of the most powerful tools we have." Hannah glanced at her, seemingly surprised by the sincere praise. As the meal progressed, the rigid atmosphere gradually relaxed. Thomas asked endless questions about Charlotte's journey west. Jacob described a hawk's nest he'd discovered in the north pasture. Even Hannah contributed occasional comments, particularly when the conversation turned to books the family owned. Samuel spoke little, but watched everything. The children's reactions, Charlotte's responses, the subtle shifts in family dynamic already occurring around his table. Once, when Charlotte caught his eye, she thought she glimpsed approval in his steady gaze. After the dishes were washed and the children sent upstairs to prepare for bed, Charlotte and Samuel found themselves alone in the main room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the eaves with the promise of a cold night ahead. "You handled them well," Samuel said, breaking the silence. He stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the stone mantel. "They're good children," Charlotte replied, echoing his earlier words. "They just need time to adjust." Samuel nodded, his profile strong against the firelight. "As do we all." He hesitated, then added, "I've prepared the small bedroom across from the children for myself. The master chamber is yours." Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and something more complex at this announcement. "That's very considerate, but I don't wish to displace you from your own room." "It's no longer just my room," he said simply. "It's yours now, as mistress of this house." The title felt both weighty and right, a responsibility Charlotte found herself eager to embrace. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me with so much so quickly." Samuel looked at her then, his dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Trust, like respect, must be earned on both sides, Mrs. Running Hawk. We've made a beginning." "A beginning?" "Yes," Charlotte thought, as she bid him good night and climbed the stairs to her new room. "A beginning with potential for growth, like the seeds dormant beneath winter soil, waiting for spring's warmth to flourish." The days melted one into another, autumn's golden splendor fading into the muted grays and whites of early winter. 3 weeks had passed since Charlotte's arrival at Running Hawk Ranch. 21 days of small victories and quiet defeats, of boundaries tested and trust tentatively extended. She had established a routine that brought much-needed structure to the household. Mornings began early with breakfast, prepared before Samuel and the boys headed out for chores. Then came lessons around the kitchen table. reading arithmetic, history, and sciences, gleaned from Samuel's surprisingly extensive library. Afternoons were dedicated to practical skills, cooking, mending, and for the boys, continuing their outdoor education with their father. It was Hannah who proved the most challenging yet rewarding of her students. The girl possessed a quick mind and voracious appetite for knowledge, particularly mathematics. Charlotte had discovered this one afternoon while teaching equations, watching in amazement as Hannah solved complex problems with instinctive understanding. "You have a remarkable gift," Charlotte had told her. "With proper instruction, you could pursue higher education someday." Hannah had looked up, surprise and yearning flashing across her face before she masked it with her usual reserve. "Pa says girls can be whatever they set their minds to, but around here, that doesn't mean much." "Your father is right," Charlotte had replied firmly. "And the world is changing, Hannah. Women are entering universities, becoming doctors and scientists. The horizon is expanding." Something had shifted between them after that conversation, a fragile alliance forming around the shared belief in Hannah's potential. Jacob had been won over more easily by Charlotte's willingness to incorporate outdoor learning into his lessons. He flourished when allowed to collect plant specimens for science study or measure distances across the ranch for practical mathematics. His energy, once scattered and disruptive, found positive channels under her guidance. Thomas, sweet-natured and eager to please, had attached himself to Charlotte with the unquestioning devotion of the very young. He followed her around the house like a shadow, helping with chores and proudly showing her his drawings. The first time he'd sleepily called her Mama before being tucked into bed, Charlotte had felt a surge of emotion so powerful it left her breathless. As for Samuel, they had established a comfortable partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Each evening after the children were asleep, they would sit by the fire, discussing the day's events, planning for the next. Charlotte found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations, to the way Samuel listened with his full attention, considering her ideas with seriousness. She learned more about him during these fireside talks, his childhood on a reservation, his education at a mission school where he developed his love of books, his determination to build something lasting in a world that often denied his humanity. In turn, she shared stories of her Boston upbringing, her decision to become a teacher despite her family's opposition, her dreams of making a difference through education. They were still virtual strangers in many ways, yet Charlotte felt herself drawing closer to this quiet, dignified man whose strength was matched by unexpected gentleness. The first serious test of their new family unit came on a frigid November morning when Sheriff Taylor arrived at the ranch, his expression grim beneath his frosted mustache. "Morning, Samuel," he said, dismounting stiffly. "Ma'am," he added, nodding to Charlotte, who stood on the porch, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Taylor." Samuel's greeting was cordial, but cautious. "What brings you out in this weather?" The sheriff stamped his feet against the cold. "Town meeting yesterday. Some folks are stirring up trouble about the school situation." He glanced at Charlotte. "Specifically about your wife teaching Indian children alongside white ones, should the schoolhouse be rebuilt." Charlotte felt her spine stiffen. "My students are children, Sheriff. Nothing more, nothing less." "I understand that, Mom. But the Petersons and their crowd are claiming it ain't proper. They're pushing to have any new school segregated." Samuel's expression remained impassive, but Charlotte noticed the tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. "There's more," Taylor continued reluctantly. "They're saying your marriage ain't legal on account of territorial statutes about mixed unions." "Oh, that's absurd," Charlotte protested, anger flaring bright within her. "Reverend Miller performed our ceremony with witnesses present. All legal requirements were met." Sheriff Taylor sighed, removing his hat. "Laws get twisted by those with an interest in twisting them. The Petersons got their eyes on this valley, always have. Your success sticks in their craw, Samuel. Now they're using your marriage as an excuse to cause trouble. What exactly are they planning? Samuel asked, his voice level despite the tension radiating from him. Petition to the territorial governor for now, claiming your children shouldn't attend any public school that gets rebuilt. Taylor hesitated. And suggesting your land grant could be invalidated if your marriage is deemed illegal. The implications hung in the cold air like frost. Without valid claim to the land, everything Samuel had built could be taken from him. The ranch, the home, the legacy he'd created for his children. Charlotte moved to stand beside her husband, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Then we'll fight them, she said firmly, together. After Sheriff Taylor departed, Samuel and Charlotte stood on the porch in silence, the weight of this new threat settling around them like the cold morning air. Charlotte felt a tightness in her chest, not fear, but a fierce protectiveness toward this family that had, somehow, become hers in just 3 short weeks. We should discuss this privately, Samuel said finally, his voice low. In the kitchen, he built up the fire while Charlotte brewed coffee, their movements synchronized in the comfortable rhythm they'd developed. Outside, snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes swirling against the window panes. When the children entered for breakfast, Hannah with a book tucked under her arm, Jacob still pulling on his suspenders, Thomas yawning widely. Samuel nodded to Charlotte. They would shield the children from this worry, at least for now. After your lessons, we'll make snow candy, Charlotte announced, forcing brightness into her voice. If the snow keeps falling... Thomas clapped with delight. Jacob glanced at the window with renewed interest. Even Hannah looked up from her book, a flicker of anticipation crossing her face. Only after the children had scattered to morning chores and Charlotte had set bread dough to rise did she and Samuel retreat to his small study off the main room. Once the door closed, Charlotte felt the careful composure she'd maintained crumble slightly. They can't do this, she said, pacing the narrow space between desk and bookshelf. They can't simply invalidate our marriage because they covet your land. Samuel watched her, his expression unreadable. They can try. The Petersons have influence with the territorial officials. But on what grounds? Miscegenation laws vary by territory, but they typically forbid marriage between whites and Negroes, not Native Americans. Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly at her knowledge of the legal terminology, but he nodded. True, but legal distinctions can be blurred when powerful men wish them to be. Charlotte stopped pacing, turning to face him directly. Then, we must be more powerful, or at least more strategic. A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. What do you suggest, Mrs. Runninghawk? She liked the way he said her name, not as a formality, but with a subtle emphasis that acknowledged her as a partner in this fight. We need allies, Reverend Miller, for one. Sheriff Taylor seems sympathetic to our cause. Who else in town might support us? Samuel considered this, leaning against his desk. Judge Williamson. He's fair-minded, respected throughout the territory. He ruled in my favor years ago when there was a dispute over water rights. He paused. And, surprisingly, Hopkins at the Mercantile. He has no love for me personally, but he despises the Petersons more. They tried to force him to sell his store to them last year. Good. We'll start there. Charlotte's mind raced, formulating a plan. We should also gather documentation, proof of your land grant, our marriage certificate, anything that establishes legal standing. Samuel watched her with growing appreciation. You're formidable when roused to battle, Charlotte. It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. I protect what's mine, she replied simply. Then, realizing the implications of her words, she added, that is, the family that has welcomed me. Samuel stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. You are part of this family now, not just as teacher to my children or mistress of my household, but as my wife." His voice softened. "Perhaps not in all ways yet, but in the ways that matter most." Charlotte felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. "Then we will fight together." Over the next week, while snow blanketed the ranch in pristine white, they prepared their defense. Samuel rode into town twice, securing support from Judge Williamson and carefully documenting their legal standing. Charlotte wrote letters to the territorial governor explaining the educational benefits of their arrangement, to her former professors at the Boston Female Seminary requesting character references, even to her reluctant parents asking them to verify her standing in society. At home, she maintained the children's routine, transforming their lessons into a subtle preparation for what might come. She taught them about civic responsibility, about standing up for what was right, about the complex history of the nation they lived in. "Why do some people hate us?" Jacob asked one afternoon as they reviewed a history lesson about westward expansion. The question, innocent yet piercing, hung in the still air of the kitchen. Charlotte set down her chalk. "It's not hate exactly, Jacob. It's fear of what's different. People find comfort in what's familiar, and sometimes that makes them resist new ideas or people who don't look or think like them." "Like Pa," Hannah said quietly. "People in town look at him different, always have." "And me," Thomas added, his small face solemn. "Billy Peterson said I'm not a real person because I'm half Indian." Charlotte felt a surge of protective anger. "Billy Peterson is wrong. You are very much a real person, Thomas. A wonderful, important person." "Is that why you married Pa?" Hannah asked suddenly, her perceptive eyes fixed on Charlotte's face. "Because you don't fear what's different?" The question caught Charlotte off guard with its insight. She considered her answer carefully, aware that her response mattered deeply. "I married your father for many reasons. Yes, I admire his strength and courage in being exactly who he is, despite what others might think. But also because he offered something I valued, a chance to be part of a family, to teach children I've come to care for very deeply, to build something meaningful in this place." Hannah nodded slowly. "That's what Ma used to say, that she and Pa were building something bigger than themselves." It was the first time any of the children had voluntarily mentioned Marie to Charlotte. The significance wasn't lost on her. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Samuel said from the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. None of them had heard him enter. "And she would be proud of how you're all handling this situation." That night, after the children were asleep, Samuel and Charlotte sat close by the fire, reviewing the documentation they'd gathered. The familiar ritual of their evening conversations had taken on new significance as the threat to their family loomed. "The Petersons have scheduled a town meeting for Saturday," Samuel said, setting down a letter from Sheriff Taylor. "They mean to present their petition then, gather signatures." Charlotte nodded, determination hardening within her. "Then we'll be there too, all of us, as a family." Samuel studied her face in the firelight. "It won't be pleasant. Things may be said, about me, about you, about our marriage." "I'm aware," she replied steadily. "But running away or hiding would only prove their point, that there's something shameful in our arrangement." She reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "There isn't. Not to me." Samuel turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting, fingers interlacing. The simple touch felt more intimate than anything they'd shared before. "Nor to me," he said, his voice low. They sat together in the warm glow of the fire, hands joined, preparing silently for the battle ahead. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a blanket of white, beautiful, harsh, and transformative, much like the challenge they now faced together. Saturday dawned bright and bitter cold, the sun reflecting blindingly off fresh snow as Samuel hitched the horses to the sleigh. Charlotte dressed the children in their Sunday best, wrapping them in warm blankets for the journey to town. Hannah, understanding more than her brothers about what was at stake, helped silently, her young face solemn with purpose. "We look like a proper family," she observed as they gathered on the porch, ready to depart. "We are a proper family," Charlotte replied, straightening Thomas's collar. "Different from some, perhaps, but no less real." The ride to Whitewater Creek passed in relative quiet, each lost in private thoughts. Samuel drove with steady hands, occasionally glancing at Charlotte beside him, her profile resolute against the winter landscape. The children huddled together in the back, Jacob and Thomas engaged in a whispered game, while Hannah read from a small book of poetry Charlotte had given her. As they approached town, Charlotte felt Samuel tense beside her. She followed his gaze to see a larger than usual number of horses and wagons lining the main street. Word of the meeting had spread, drawing folks from outlying homesteads and neighboring communities. "Quite a gathering," Charlotte murmured. Samuel nodded grimly. "The Petersons have ensured an audience." He glanced back at the children, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this. The children could stay at the minister's house while we attend." Charlotte straightened her shoulders. "No, we face this together as a family. The children should understand that we don't shrink from difficulty." She met his eyes directly. "Unless you believe there's danger." "Not physical danger, no. Words can wound too, though." "Words can be answered with truth," Charlotte replied, "and our children are stronger than you think." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, pride perhaps, or deeper feeling. He nodded once, guiding the sleigh toward the town hall. Inside, the large room was already crowded with townsfolk. Conversations hushed momentarily as the Running Hawk family entered, then resumed with increased intensity. Charlotte felt the weight of stares, some curious, some hostile, some sympathetic. She kept her head high, one hand on Thomas's shoulder, the other holding her documentation satchel. Samuel guided them to seats near the front, where Judge Williamson nodded in greeting. Reverend and Mrs. Miller smiled encouragingly. To Charlotte's surprise, Mr. Hopkins from the Mercantile tipped his hat respectfully as they passed. At the podium, Mayor Fletcher called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "Folks, we're here to discuss matters pertaining to the rebuilding of our schoolhouse and other concerns that have been raised." His uncomfortable glance toward the Running Hawks wasn't lost on Charlotte. Harold Peterson rose immediately, a tall man with florid cheeks and cold eyes. "Mayor, I have a petition to present regarding the legal status of certain land claims in this territory." He produced a document with several signatures already affixed. "Specifically, we contend that Samuel Running Hawk's land grant should be reviewed in light of his irregular marriage situation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Samuel remained perfectly still beside Charlotte, only the slight tightening of his jaw betraying his tension. "Furthermore," Peterson continued, gaining confidence from the reaction, "we propose that any new schoolhouse be constructed with separate facilities for Indian children to prevent unnatural mixing that can only lead to moral degradation." "That's absurd," a voice called from the crowd. Mrs. Miller, her kind face flushed with indignation. "Children are children. Our Lord makes no such distinctions." "With respect, ma'am," Peterson countered smoothly, "territorial law makes distinctions, particularly regarding marriages between whites and Indians. Such unions are not recognized in many jurisdictions, making land claims through such partnerships invalid." Judge Williamson rose then, his imposing figure commanding immediate respect. "As the judicial representative for this district, I feel obliged to correct a misrepresentation of the law." He adjusted his spectacles. "While it's true that some territories prohibit marriages between whites and certain races, Montana Territory has no specific statute forbidding unions between whites and Native Americans. Furthermore, I personally reviewed Mr. Running Hawk's land grant documentation last week. It is entirely in order, predating his marriage and established on his own merit. Charlotte felt a surge of gratitude toward the judge. Beside her, Samuel remained outwardly composed, but she felt his hand brush against hers briefly. A silent acknowledgement of this first small victory. Peterson's face darkened. There's still the matter of propriety. A white woman of education teaching Indian children alongside our own. I would like to speak, Charlotte said, rising before she could reconsider. All eyes turned to her, and she felt Samuel's questioning gaze. This hadn't been part of their planned strategy, but instinct told her this was her moment to act. Mayor Fletcher hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Running Hawk has the floor. Charlotte moved to the center aisle, conscious of her every step, her every breath. I came to Montana Territory because I believe education is a right belonging to all children, regardless of their parentage or background. In the 3 weeks I've lived at Running Hawk Ranch, I've seen firsthand the intelligence, curiosity, and potential in every child there. She turned slightly, including the assembled townspeople in her gaze. I understand fear of difference. It's natural to be wary of what we don't understand. But I've learned that the greatest barriers fall away when we simply take time to know one another as human beings. She paused, gathering her thoughts. My marriage to Samuel Running Hawk began as a practical arrangement. I needed purpose and security. He needed someone to educate and nurture his children. But what I've found in his home is something many search for all their lives without success. Respect, dignity, and a place where I truly belong. From the corner of her eye, Charlotte saw Hannah sitting straighter, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Jacob and Thomas watched her with solemn attention. Samuel's expression was one she couldn't fully read, intensity mixed with something deeper, more vulnerable. If you rebuild your schoolhouse, Charlotte continued, her voice gaining strength, I would be honored to teach all children who wish to learn, without distinction or division, not because the law demands it, but because it's right. And if you cannot accept this vision, then I will continue teaching at our ranch, creating the kind of education and the kind of future that embraces all of humanity's potential. She returned to her seat, heart pounding, aware of the profound silence that had fallen over the room. Then, from the back, someone began to clap. Sheriff Taylor, she realized. Others joined in, including Judge Williamson and the Millers. Not everyone applauded, but enough to suggest the tide of opinion was shifting. Mayor Fletcher cleared his throat. Perhaps we should vote on these matters separately. First, regarding the petition questioning the Running Hawk land claim, if I may, Peterson interrupted, his expression sour. In light of certain clarifications, I wish to withdraw that portion of the petition. It was a retreat, if a grudging one. Charlotte felt Samuel exhale slowly beside her. The matter of the schoolhouse remained contentious, with passionate arguments from both sides. In the end, a compromise was reached. The school would be rebuilt with community funds and open to all children, but attendance would remain voluntary for families with objections. As the meeting concluded, townsfolk approached the Running Hawks with varying reactions. Some offered tentative congratulations, others merely nodded in passing acknowledgement. Mrs. Miller embraced Charlotte warmly. You spoke from the heart, my dear, she said. God will honor that courage. The drive home was quieter than their journey into town, but with a different quality to the silence, not tension, but reflection. The children eventually fell asleep in the back of the sleigh, exhausted by the day's emotions. Stars appeared in the darkening sky, brilliant against the vast Montana wilderness. You surprised me today, Samuel said finally, his voice soft in the stillness. Charlotte glanced at him. I surprised myself. I hadn't planned to speak. Some of the most important words come unplanned. He guided the horses around a bend in the road, the ranch house appearing in the distance, lamplight glowing in its windows. "Did you mean what you said? About finding a place where you belong?" Charlotte felt warmth rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "Yes, every word." Samuel was quiet for several moments. "When I proposed this arrangement, I thought only of what you could give to my children, to my household." His profile was strong against the starlit snow. "I never considered what you might come to mean to me." Charlotte's heart quickened. "And what is that, Samuel?" He turned to her then, the horses slowing as they approached home. In the silver moonlight, his face held an openness she hadn't seen before. "Hope," he said simply. "A second chance at happiness I never thought to find again." At the house, they carried the sleeping children inside, tucking them into their beds with practiced care that had become a shared ritual. Charlotte brushed Hannah's hair from her forehead, Thomas's small hand still clutching the wooden horse Samuel had carved for him. Jacob murmured something about snow forts before turning over, buried in blankets. Later, they stood together on the porch, watching the night sky. The cold was fierce, but neither seemed willing to go inside just yet, to break this moment of newfound understanding between them. "What happens now?" Charlotte asked softly. Samuel turned to her, snow crystals catching in his dark hair. "Now we continue building what we've started. A home, a family, a future." He reached for her hand, his touch warm despite the winter chill. Not just because it's practical, but because it's what we choose. When he drew her closer, Charlotte went willingly into his embrace. Their first real kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening with shared emotion that had been growing steadily, day by day, moment by moment. It was not the passionate rush of youthful love, but something more enduring, a connection forged through shared purpose and mutual respect, now blossoming into genuine affection. Inside the house, a lamp burned in the window, guiding them home. And as snow began to fall once more, dusting their shoulders and melting where their breath mingled, Charlotte understood that what had begun as shelter, both for her and for this family she now claimed as her own, had transformed into something far more precious. Not just a safe harbor from life's storms, but a place to truly live, to grow, to love together.